So there's been a lot of trades, a lot of new faces in new places, new faces in South Beach, new faces in Philly. I think there's a lot of moving parts going on in the NBA world today. Let me know your thoughts, Trubisky.
Yeah, it's been a crazy offseason so far with all these trades during free agency. It seems like now free agency is down just a new trade deadline where you have all these trades going on, especially the two big ones are probably Giannis going to the Heat and Jaylen Brown being traded to the Sixers. So those were two big trades. I think Giannis for the Heat, that was one of the places where that was a potential possibility. And I think most people that follow the NBA knew that was probably going to happen, or at least a trade for Giannis was going to happen. But probably the one that shocked most people that kind of just developed all of a sudden during this offseason was the Jaylen Brown trade. And I think a lot of people they were surprised too that he even got traded directly within their same division, that the Celtics did that and traded him to the Philadelphia 76ers. So that was a shock. Is really just seeing how well Jaylen Brown played this past season, carrying the Celtics when Jason Tatum was injured. A lot of people didn't see them at the beginning of the season being finishing in the East number two, but he was able to help lead them and probably had his best season of his career. But I think there's probably a lot of things that happened off the court, things that maybe the Celtics didn't like, or uh, just overall financial wise. I don't know if they wanted to commit to him long term with the amount of money that he was going to be uh, the amount of money that he earned and well deserved. So definitely a tricky and challenging situation, but I think he has a good situation now in Philadelphia. He definitely has a chip on his shoulder, and I guess we'll see who comes out on top between the Sixers and Celtics.
Yep. I'm wishing both guys, the best, as far as a injury-free season. I think that, injuries definitely play a part in any sport, and I think that's going to dictate the long run of success for, each side. I think that, not to get too in the business side of like the second apron and just the financial sides, I'm pretty sure that was a factor in just making the moves there. But the bigger question is, do you think the situation, or do you think the way GMs trade away players, do you think they're handled with respect, or how do you think respect involved in just when players get traded, like the aspect of things like that?
Yeah, I think respect is definitely keeping an open line of communication because a lot of times you might see a player might be traded out of nowhere. They're not really given a heads up, or it could be a possibility there's there one day and all of a sudden they're on another team the next. So
Even
it
during the
could be,
game,
yeah,
trading during the game and stuff like that. So,
yeah. All of a sudden get pulled down. All of a sudden, yeah, you're not going back in. You're traded. So
yeah.
it can definitely be crazy. I think certain organizations or certain teams, depending on the star player. They might have a certain level of respect where they'll give them a heads up. Other times, depending on how big of a trade it is and how they need to execute it, it might have to be done where they can't tell anybody or have anything leak out. Otherwise, the trade wouldn't happen. So I see that side as far as what the team owners and GM and front office try to do. But I think it's definitely tough. But I think we said it previously in other broadcasts how that's kind of the world you sign up in when you're in the NBA. Things can happen like that. So I think the main thing is as far as treating players with respect is just keeping the open line of communication if you can, and then if that's not a possibility, just making sure that respect at least is given to the player.
Right, definitely agree. I think that whenever you're trading, away somebody, I think that it's hard to have balance. And I think that's the key just with anything in life is just having the balance because there's everybody in the league is for the right person and the right package can be traded. Now, of course, there's going to be certain players that are going to require much more than, other players and stuff like that. But I think at the end of the day, it's just about balance. Just saying, hey, at the end of the day, we're here to win championships. And at the end of the day, if we can make a move that's going to help facilitate that goal, and that means losing a player, but bringing in picks, or maybe if that's just swapping out contracts, I think that's the best way to proceed. But I think that with sports, there's so much passion. There's so much just incentives in terms of financially just to kind of involved in there. And especially you got the gambling aspect too inside of it. So I think it's just trying to balance both of those worlds. It's kind of how you get respect, but respect is up to the player and just how they interpret just the communication from the top down from the GM and the owner. So yeah.
Yeah. And do you think the Jaylen Brown trade specifically was handled with respect?
That's a good question. Do I think it was handled with respect? I don't think there's a respectful way to trade a player in a way. I think that that's a hard question. Hanson, I gotta think about that one. Do I think it was handled with respect? I think that whenever a player hears their name in trade talks, I think that's where the disrespect can be interpreted. I think that whenever a player who gives their blood, sweat, and tears to an organization and city and has success in terms of NBA championships, finals MVPs, leading the team in scoring, I think anybody who puts that much effort in can feel disrespected if the organization is trying to move off that. Now, I think that on the organizational side, there's, financial interests that, affect performance, of course. But at the end of the day, I think both sides did what was best for the team. And I think at the end of the day, no matter what sport, whether it's soccer, football, basketball, the team is going to do what's the best for the team. And so I think at the end of the day, that's what we happened here. Wish everybody well, and hopefully that, each side can move forward and, have much success. How about yourself?
Mhm. Yeah, I think it definitely just trickled down. Like you're saying, it's tough when you're Jaylen Brown, you're always being involved in trade talks. And then when the trade doesn't go through, how do you move forward from there? So it seemed like it was a situation where because he was involved in trade talks all these years, maybe the front office felt like, okay, now we had to trade him before the season starts, and then you just have a whole just situation where there's always going to be questions from the media about the situation. Then are you really going to feel like all the players are locked in? So I think it was a situation where it could have been avoided, but because of the all the trade talks and how the one potential trade where they were going to try and trade for Giannis, but that didn't go through. Once you hear that and see that all in the public, it was probably only a matter of time. And then there was just other things that happened where the Celtics probably thought, okay, now we have to do our best to trade Jaylen Brown and see what we can get back and kind of move forward from there. But like you were saying, it's just tricky when your name is always involved in trade talks. How do you really fully commit when you know that the front office and the people that you're committing to want to trade you?
That's why they call it the professionals, because I think that this is what comes with, versus playing, outside in your backyard and playing professional is just that, you got to always kind of have a poker face and kind of get the job done. But the bigger question is, when is the right time to trade a star player? Is it when's too early, when's too late? And that's where I was talking about, like the balance. When do you think is a good time to trade, a star player?
Yeah, it's another difficult situation. I think that's why with the front office, you have people that really had to make very difficult decisions. Like, for example, with the Giannis situation, it was probably overdue just the way how things were going with the team and how they weren't really having as much success when it came time for the playoffs. So he was involved in potentially being traded or wanting to potentially leave for a couple of years, but that kind of dragged along. And then you have the situation where they are now, where now he's on the Heat. So I think it's always tricky. I think you want to trade while the iron's hot, or if the player requests a trade, you want to trade immediately. But if the situation where they don't request a trade is kind of tricky to start with because you don't know how they're going to take to that reaction of being involved in the trade talk. So I think you don't want to have it drag out too long. And I think you also want, if you are going to trade the star, trade them while they have a successful season. And if you don't see them in your future, and if you don't want to continue that success, then you want to trade them immediately rather than drag it out. Then they hear their name in trade talks, and then you have the whole situation affect the locker room.
Yep, and that's another thing is just that, if a player is disgruntled and is going to the media and speaking about that, that affects trade value. So that affects what you can get back. So it's a lot of moving parts and a domino effect on like the best way to trade a star. But I think at the end of the day, discretion is probably the biggest key. Like if we were ever in the owner's seats, probably like the biggest, key, because I think that less is more. And I think that sometimes you can get more when nobody knows what's going on. But in this age of social media and everybody, streaming and tweeting, it's hard to keep things private though. But I think everything is all about, balance. But when you do have a star player, would you prefer to give him discretion in where he wants to go, or would you kind of more do like what's best for the team and like the organization side?
Yeah, I think from the front office perspective, they're always going to want to try and do what's best for the team. But I think if you want to have that relationship with the player, if you want your organization to stand out and say, okay, our organization is known for taking care of the players and the dedication that they give to us, is only right that we at least get their thoughts. If we say, okay, we want to trade the player, we want to have an open line of communication. If we say, okay, we want a trade to happen, the player agrees, then hearing their thoughts of potential destinations, I think is a good start, and then taking that into consideration. Does that happen all the time? Definitely not, especially with what's going on nowadays with the NBA and how the situations are. I think that's an ideal world to kind of work with the player, at least get their thoughts on a situation where you can get the best return. But oftentimes the teams are always going to think about themselves. So I think as a player, you also have to think about yourself and kind of advocate for what you want to do and what you want, where you want to go to. So I think that's all you really can do. But at the end of the day, I think the front office is always going to do what they think is best. So they might not agree to where you want to go, but all you got to do is try.
And it's a business at the end of the day, and I think
Yeah.
that we always forget that, there's people's lives at stake, there's people taking care of their families. So I understand, their aspect of kind of being a little bit more wanting respect and a little bit more discretion and compassion when it comes to things. Definitely understand that. But at the end of the day, it's a business at the end of the day. We're trying to sell tickets, we're trying to, put people in the seats. So I think that, there's certain owners that prioritize the money aspect, there's certain owners that prioritize the championship aspects, there's certain owners that this is just a tax write-off. So, and I'm pretty sure, without getting too specific, you can see whether it's the NBA, NFL, or, even MLS clubs that, the priorities for how the organization wants to run vary, which is, totally fine. But I think at the end of the day, you know, it's a multitude of factors. I think if the player was drafted there, homegrown talent, I think that adds a lot of weight to how people choose to deal with the organization. But at the end of the day, just try your best, hopefully that nothing happens. But I will say that we're seeing less and less and less of homegrown talent, meaning that stars stay in one place forever. You could probably point to, on one hand, how many stars are kind of just staying in one organization. But I think that that's the trend we're going to see more, in the future. You're going to see a lot of star players team hop, not necessarily just signing, but just getting traded and stuff like that. But yeah.
So in the NBA, it's definitely very hard to win a championship, and keeping that momentum of having a championship team is all what you want to have, and what you want to be consistent with that. So what would you say signals that a championship window for a team has closed in the NBA?
Well, obviously the obvious, losing the championship. Obviously that's the big one. I think just consistently, just first round exits, second round exits, consistent injuries. I would probably say inter turmoil between like the players. I'll also say, I think just the optimism going into the season. I think there's a multitude of aspects you can point to as far as championship closings, but at the end of the day, with sports, you never know what's going to happen. You can have an idea, and everything about championships and just like trying to run an organization is just our best guesses, because you're always going to have teams, sleeper teams, seven seeds that come out and kind of do well. Even like with soccer, you have teams come out of nowhere like Cape Verde or, something like that. But I think at the end of the day, it's a multitude of things that kind of signal the championship window closing. But I think ultimately it's just the health of your team, age, and just the conference too, because also you can have a good team in year one, but through other teams making moves, other teams drafting players, adding players, could have a whole new landscape. So each season is not going to be the same, because this team in 2008 could have been the championship team. Go 2009, the team's not even going to make the playoffs because people grow, schemes change, film study. So that's just my perspective. What do you think?
Yeah, it's definitely crazy times with the NBA, because you can be in the finals one year, then not make the playoffs another year. So I think the main thing you want to see to signal that your championship window is closing is, are you making progress? Are you constantly getting, for example, to the conference finals or reach the finals, and you see that momentum, okay, we have some promise there, then you can see that potential of having that championship window. But if you see yourself kind of going backwards, maybe one year make the finals, and all of a sudden you're losing the first round, don't make the playoffs, that might signal that your championship windows closing. But I think the main thing is you want to see that progress. You want to have good momentum. You want to have just that feeling vibe. Okay, we have a promising team. We feel that with the right moves, or just with the right experience, year after year, we can eventually close out and win the championship. I think the main thing is you want to be consistent of where you're at, as far as making it very far in the playoffs and seeing, okay, do we have the players? Do we have what we need to actually make that championship run successful? So I think those are the main things you want to see.
Now, it's no secret that getting to the playoffs is no small feat, and it's definitely an accomplishment in itself. But we have seen in the past, and probably going to see in the future, we've seen players who excel in the regular season and not in the playoffs. So if you were a GM, how would playoff results and playoff, wins, losses, and how much a player performs affects your roster decisions?
Yeah, that's definitely going to play a big part, especially if you're a team that wants to go far in the playoffs and win a championship. You really want to see how you're doing in the playoffs and how your team is playing. Are they getting better in the playoffs, or are they, like you were saying, dropping off in the playoffs and not performing up to their capabilities? So I think that's definitely going to be a big thing you want to keep track of as far as what you want to do moving forward with your roster to see if you do want to win that championship and you're seeing how you're performing in the playoffs. If they're people are performing well, you want to keep those players, and you see people or players constantly they play well in the regular season, but then when the playoffs come, they're not really playing as well. You might want to see, okay, what can we do to either develop that player, or if we need to move on and try and see if there's any other better options doing that. So I think playoff results are definitely going to be a big part in how you keep your team, and if you want to really make it to the promised land to win that championship, how you want to keep your roster together and eventually get that goal.
Agreed. And I think for me, playoff performance affects dollars for me. I think that's how you determine which player you're going to pay max money. Now, of course, on the business side, the second apron, and that kind of is convoluted in that aspect. But for me as a GM, I probably would just say when you perform when the lights get bright, that's what I'm paying for. I think that that's the hard part about just keeping rosters together is that every year people are making more money. And I think that, sometimes just because you're making more money doesn't necessarily mean you deserve more money based on your results. Of course, get all the money you can. I'm not here to say how much somebody should or shouldn't make, but at the end of the day, I think that there should be a distinction for players who perform when the lights get bright and players who don't. Now, whatever that balance is, the dollar amount is up to the discretion of the teams, but I definitely think for me as a GM, who shows up when the lights get bright is where I'll probably put my dollars. Respectfully though, but at the end of the day, every player is different. I also think the role, I think the player's role affects the player performance too, because you can have a certain player, he's just here for defense, so I'm not going to penalize him for not scoring any points in the playoffs because that's not his role. I think that's another aspect that affects roster decisions. It's just, yeah, the player may be good, but what is the role on the team that he's trying to execute so we can win a championship? And that adds a big kind of nuance there in terms of roster decisions, in my humble opinion. So, yeah.